This episode is brought to you by the Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle, with plans starting at just $16.99 a month. Stream the latest seasons of The Last of Us on Max, Andor on Disney Plus, and the final season of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu. All of these and more streaming soon. Terms apply. Visit DisneyPlusHuluMaxBundle.com for more details.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is the Long Island Report. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is a vice chair of the state Republican Party as well as the county chair of the Republican Party out in Suffolk County. With me is our very favorite special guest co-host, Eric Levine, noted attorney, political commentator, essayist, and host to the stars. So, gentlemen, let me just say, I've had a very interesting week, and Eric's had a very interesting week. So let's just spend a couple of moments. I'll just allude to our week, and then we can talk to the topics. On Monday, Eric, as he often does, hosts some of the biggest movers and shakers in the country. And we had Senator Tom Cotton on the seminar. It was a wonderful event. Senator Cotton was very impressive, talked about the need for a strong military, national defense, and a real strategy to deal with the threats from China. And he fully recognizes that China is a lot more than a competitor, as Biden likes to characterize it, but is really a threat to America and a real adversary. And today, once again, he did some and I was privileged to be at that lunch. And then once again today, he had a lunch meeting with former governor of South Carolina and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and another bright star in the Republican Party. John Catsimatidis and I today had lunch with Governor Youngkin of Virginia, who's another superstar in the Republican Party, is bringing a breath of fresh air and sanity and vision to domestic as well as a vision to how we have to deal with the world economy and our threats. But I just want our listeners to know that the three of us, and of course Jesse has been busy running the party out in Suffolk, getting his candidacies for the local elections in place. And I understand a designee for the county executive race, Jesse, is going to be the very distinguished town supervisor of Brookhaven, Ed Romaine. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Ed Romaine's been a 10-year county Brookhaven town supervisor, Suffolk's largest town. While I don't agree with Newsday on a regular basis, I do agree with them. In 2019, they referred to him as the most effective chief executive on Long Island.
Well, that's good news, and you can use your good offices, Jesse, that we can bring Mr. Romaine back on the show. My recollection is that we had him on the show once before, a couple of years ago, or a year or so ago. I'd like to do that. So just make a note. We want to bring Mr. Romaine back to talk about his vision for Suffolk County.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's begin the show by talking about what this Ohio train disaster tells us about the legitimacy of this administration and their competency in running government. Eric, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think it tells us a few things. First, it tells us that we better start building more pipelines rather than shutting them down, because that's the safest way to transport oil, gas, and other potentially toxic materials. We put them on trains, we put them on trucks. That's much more likely we're going to have spills and accidents. So this administration really needs to start rethinking its views on pipelines. And the second thing it tells us is that Pete Buttigieg is an incompetent Secretary of Transportation. But this is what happens when you put profile ahead of merit. He has this job for one reason. He's a gay man. He has done nothing else in his life that qualifies him for the position. He was the mayor of a very small Midwestern city that had little infrastructure. It had maybe 2 taxis, a Lionel train, and a pontoon. And all of a sudden now he's in charge of every bridge, train line, the interstate highway system, and infrastructure that the country is building. The guy is just simply not equipped to handle the job. And this is up and down throughout the administration. Of course, the poster child for this is Kamala Harris. The woman is utterly incompetent to hold the position of vice president. And we should be honest with everybody. She has the position, she was appointed and selected for one reason. She's a black woman. It has nothing to do with her merit. There are plenty of black women in the country who I'm sure who are very qualified to be vice president or maybe even president. Nikki Haley, who I met with today, a woman of color, would be a fantastic president. But Kamala Harris has no such qualifications. But she was appointed because of the progressive view of position of viewing everything through the lens
politics.
of race. Right, exactly. It's completely identity politics. And this is throughout the administration. And the third and probably the most important thing this tells us is that we have a crisis of confidence in government. Can we believe what we are told? Perfect example is we were told very little what we were told about COVID was truthful. Much of it was intentionally inaccurate. I mean, perfect example is that the Department of Energy has now concluded, and the FBI is now also saying that it has concluded that COVID was released from a lab by man in China. Remember when Tom Cotton or other individuals would make that case? They were accused of being conspiracy theorists. The press would go to town saying, these are debunked. This isn't true. But this is what happens when politics gets ahead of the truth. The last three presidents, Obama, Trump, and Biden, have demonstrated very little use for the truth. It's all about what is in my political interest. And if I have to deceive the American people to advance my political interest, that's what I'm going to do. So there really is a crisis of confidence in our government. We're going to need a president in 2024 who can return integrity in government return integrity to government by telling Americans hard truths and convincing them that America comes before politics. And unless and until we have leadership that Americans can trust, and I mean all Americans, not a partisan few, American democracy is very much in a dangerous place.
Let me just say about the Ohio matter, then I want Jesse's comments. The Ohio matter is particularly frightening because, first of all, they thought they could burn off these chemicals. Now, anything a common sense scientist would tell you is the worst thing to do is to burn off the chemicals. You should have been containing the chemicals because when you burn it off, you get that fume, and that fumes go all into the air and the atmosphere. It contaminates the air, the drinking water. It contaminates the topsoil. And then they kept saying, well, it's not a problem. You don't have to have a mask or a gas mask, and you can drink the water, and you can brush your teeth, and you can shower with it. Now, we know from the 9/11 experience that that's absolute nonsense. And the fact of the matter, this plume that was out there with these toxic chemicals, these were the same toxic chemicals they used for gas warfare in World War I. This is very serious business. And where was Biden when this happened? He was nowhere to be found. He still hasn't shown up there. Buttigieg shows up 20 days later. They never coordinated. FEMA took a long time to get there, and only after they were humiliated by Donald Trump did they show up there. This is very serious. So it's a crisis of confidence in our government. Their legitimacy, as Eric points out, is questionable because if they're not speaking truth to the American people, how can you trust them and how can you get them to support government policies? And competence, where is the competence that sets a fire to toxic chemicals? Where's the competence that lets these poor people out in Ohio drift along, telling them everything's fine, and not give them real relief? Jesse, your turn.
Yeah, I'm sitting here, and I can't disagree with each and every one of you, but maybe what I could add is a couple of things. I think what we're seeing in a different turn in terms of confidence in government, I think that government took a big hit in its confidence level, yet another one with the Ohio train derailment. The fact that we have multiple agencies, and I think, Your Honor, we spoke about this last week. There are multiple agencies out there without one central command. You're right. FEMA should have been there on site, or there should have been one central location where everything was being run out of. That wasn't what was happening here. We had a bunch of different agencies pointing fingers at and crossing fingers and giving contrary type of direction to the people in that community. The confidence in this in the government also leads not to just what we call that. I guess we call that ineptness And we're seeing the bureaucracy and the deep state in its out there in the open where they don't know what they're doing. And it was incompetence on the part of the administration of not putting a central command in that area. And here, on a dangerous situation, a harrowing situation in our own country. Number two, it has come out after that 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 COVID was released by man in China after the mass media, and I think there was a story in the New York Times or just recently about the New York Times that says that, again, the New York Times has taken a hit in its credibility because they needed to go forward with the narrative that it was not China. But the American people don't trust that because they can't trust the government because the government's not telling them the truth. And it dates back all the way, and you touched upon it, Your Honor, to 9/11. The EPA went down to the pile and said, it's okay for you to be here. It's safe for you to breathe the air. It's safe for you to drink here and whatnot. Take these limited steps and you'll be fine. Well, they're saying the same thing to the people of Ohio and East Palestine, and they don't believe them. There was 50,000, species of 50,000 fish that have died. I mean, when you see the governor there, J.D. Vance was there. He moved in a creek. He just disturbed the creek, and you could see the oil film come to the top. Well, I dared Governor Biden. I'm sorry. I dare President Biden or any one of his members of the administration to drink that water. If they were so confident in it, drink that water, not do it as a photo op, because that's what they're asking the people of that community to do that. And they were negligent. Presidents, I understand sometimes they can't set foot in a crisis area because what they bring takes away from what needs the job that needs to be done. That's why President Bush waited several days, if not a week, before he went to ground zero. You don't want to get into the way of the good hard work that needs to be done initially. But 20 days it took the transportation secretary to get there, and Biden would rather go to Ukraine and Europe before go to Ohio, and then use it as a political matter to say whose responsibility it is. Well, it's a responsibility of the commander-in-chief to protect the citizens and marshal the resources of the American government to help those people. And he failed in doing that.
Eric.
Well, to the drinking water issue. So Senator J.D. Vance mucked up some of the water, and it had oil, and it was really quite disgusting. And it's that water would not be safe to drink. But that's not the water that the residents of East Palestine drink.
I'm using that as an example.
Right. No, but I'm going to pick up on that. Governor DeWine and the head of FEMA actually, in a public display, drank the water of East Palestine from the reservoir, whatever the source of water would be for the residents and citizens of that town. And despite the fact of them drinking it repeatedly, the residents still don't trust them. I mean, that just tells you the level of distrust that people have in local, state, and federal government. And that's frightening. Democracies cannot function if the electorate does not trust their elected officials. We're really in a very dangerous place. The leadership of our country at all levels really needs to start working on winning back the trust of the American people by telling them the truth, regardless of how hard that truth is to hear or it is to say, and then go forward with policies with the knowledge of the American people, explaining to them every step of the way, I'm doing this is why, and lead and bring the American people with you. Right now, the American people aren't really interested in following any of these people because they don't trust them.
Well, both Jesse and you talked about the situation with respect to the COVID virus. So let's be very clear. People have said to me, well, why do we believe the Department of Energy? What do they know about the origins of the COVID vaccine? Well, very few people know this, but it happens to be true factually and legally that there's a resource center, there's a lab in the Department of Energy that specializes in these matters. I didn't know about it until I did some research on it, and it's there. Within the Department of Energy, and that's the one who is responsible for getting this issue out, they know more about this than vast numbers of other governmental agencies. They were really the go-to people. But everyone lied and misrepresented the facts. It wasn't a wet market because there wasn't a bat being sold, and there wasn't a bat for miles. There was a cover-up by the media. There was a cover-up by the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is controlled by China. This lab, by the way, was funded in large measure by U.S. dollars, and Fauci is the one who moved that money in that gain-of-function research there. Do you know why? Because we weren't allowed to do it here in the States. So he moved it offshore into China, and China's lab in Wuhan had a track record of being dismally negligent. So, of course, the overwhelming likelihood is that it came out from the lab. And again, they trotted out the press secretaries at the White House and said, well, there's no real consensus about where the source of origin was for this terrible, terrible, terrible the problem that we needed to do a mass globalization of a vaccine to try to combat because we were losing millions of people. The problem is the truth got in the way of political agendas. And the real question, and we have to take the break now because Kevin's giving us the slide. The real question is, why was the United States government so willing to protect China and allow China to destroy the evidence both at the lab where people, the scientists were disappeared, and all the evidence at the wet market? That's what we have to think about. What was the government of the United States doing when they became co-conspirators in this fabrication about the wet market? This is the Long Island Report. I am Judge Richard Weinberg with esteemed political commentator and essayist and attorney Eric Levine, and my very good friend and colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. We'll be back in a moment for more interesting conversation. Please stay tuned.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
All right, this is the Long Island Report, and we are back with my two very good friends and esteemed colleagues, Eric Levine, noted commentator, political essayist, an attorney, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the vice chair of the state Republican Party as well as the chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party. At the break, we were talking off radio, and Eric raised a good point. Eric, would you develop what we were talking about and have Jesse comment on it?
Yeah, so beyond the government, we had the question beyond why the government was so interested in suppressing the idea that the COVID leak came from a lab. It's why the press was so wedded to the idea, was so locked onto it. You know, one of the things we were talking about with Tom Cotton yesterday is he was reminding everyone, and it was in his book, that he was one of the first people to raise the specter that perhaps it was released in a gain-of-function research in a lab in Wuhan. And the New York Times went ballistic. They accused him of being a racist. They refused to print it. They decided that they would call it, this is a debunked conspiracy, never explaining why they thought it was debunked other than the government saying it was in a wet market, not a lab. But there was absolutely no research into it. Why is the press so compliant and willing to buy into some of these fabrications? And now you have people like Tom Cotton who have been vindicated by his suspicions at the time, but the press is still really slow in getting there. And that's really a good question to ask the press. I'm curious why the New York Times remains wedded to the idea that they can't conclusively say, yes, DOE said this, yes, the FBI is saying this, there must be merit to it. It's just remarkable to me.
Jesse, your turn.
I completely agree. I don't understand it. And the only thing I can understand, I would think that maybe there was such a narrative and such a fervor to remove Donald Trump from office in 2020 that any narrative, whether it be the Hunter Biden laptop being censored or the narrative that it was not the part of the Hunan virus, this COVID-19 came from the Hunan lab, was just part of a narrative to make sure that the president got bad press, and in such he lost an election. But I think even worse than that, I don't understand why they have not come to terms, at least a little, in acknowledging these stories from the agencies that they used to tout as the reason and the source for their positions.
Yeah, at least say it's an open question. They can't even get themselves to that.
Well, listen, they can't even.
Right,
gentlemen, where is the apology to the American people of the 51 so-called experts in the intelligence community saying that Hunter Biden's laptop had all the earmarks of Russian disinformation?
Well, now they're saying it was taken out of context. That's the rejoinder. It was taken out of context. They didn't explain at the time it was being taken out of context.
They took it out of context.
But it's just saying it's taken out of context.
So let me ask you a question. Where do we go as American citizens and voters to get our vote back? Where do we get our vote back?
Exactly. Well, here's the thing. We talk. This is like it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Eric spoke about and we both all spoke about the lack of trust in our government. The lack of trust in our government comes because we have now activist mainstream news that they want to decide and see what the story is going to be, what political parties take shape or take power, and who should sit in Oval offices. That's their right on the opinion pages. But I come from that industry originally. I had my degrees in journalism, and there was always, that big Chinese wall. News is news in China, and editorial is editorial. Right now, it seems like everything's advertorial. Everything's like an advertisement, and we pick and choose the facts we want to use to back our story. That's what now, unfortunately, leads to the explosion of ideas, good and mostly bad, on social media, which in turn leads to conspiracy theories and lack of trust. Somehow, the industry needs to right itself. Economically, it's taking a hit, and I think in terms of credibility, confidence, it is taking a hit. That is an industry that is key to the First Amendment and free speech.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say, let's be clear. It's not just on the left. Fox News has a serious problem with this too. Look at the lawsuit by the Dominion on the voting machines. Fox News is in a boatload of trouble. It really does look like they intentionally lied, and if they did, they deserve to be punished. Folks like some of the things that Tucker Carlson peddles in and Laura Ingraham peddles in. It defies belief. You listen to it and say, how can anybody say that? So it's on the left and the right. So let's be clear that they want to sell. They need ratings. That's what drives this. And really, I still put the blame at the feet of our elected officials. They can rise above this. They can say it's not true. Donald Trump could have said to Fox, this X, Y, and Z isn't true. Joe Biden can say to CNN and MSNBC, this isn't true. They don't, because it advances their self-political interests. And that's really the core of the problem. Our leaders are more interested in their self-aggrandizement than serving the American people. That's the fundamental problem.
All right, let's switch gears, gentlemen. I want to raise the issue of the case that was just argued in the Supreme Court of the United States, which is the challenge on constitutional grounds for the loan forgiveness program, which was put forth right before the midterm elections last year by the Biden administration. Now, for the record, people may not know this, but both Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden in years past recognized that a loan forgiveness program done by an executive order, a stroke of the pen of the President of the United States, would be unconstitutional. Unconstitutional. It was clear. They're on the record of having said that. They've said you can't do it but by legislative action by the Congress. They knew it. They went ahead anyway, and they pushed this deal. 26 million people signed up for this loan forgiveness program, promising them $10,000 back. Do you think, gentlemen, that may have had an impact on the election in the midterms when 26 million people signed up to get $10,000 back? And this might have influenced their vote. What say you, Jesse?
I absolutely think it did. And from a political point of view, it was a masterful move. It drew out young voters as we haven't seen in some time for a Democratic base, and it did that. But it's funny because you pointed it out. The president even said in his own words and in his previous positions on it, said it was unconstitutional, said it's something we couldn't do. Yet he moved forward and forged through that. Anybody that has gone through elementary, middle school, or high school social studies class knows that the Congress holds the purse strings. They're the ones that control the budget and the expenditure of dollars. If a senior in high school or a seventh grader in middle school knows it, or just an elementary school student knows it, how does a president and his staff not know it? This was a pure political move that has been moved forward. You got 26 million people excited over nothing. And it appears, based on some of the reports that were held this week, that it seems that this case is going to go down in flames, and it's going to be ruled unconstitutional. And it should be.
Eric.
Well, there's no question that it may have contributed to the outcome of the election, but I still say that the primary reason Republicans did so poorly in the off-year elections because we ran a bunch of terrible candidates in New Hampshire, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, in Georgia, and had we run better Senate candidates in those states, notwithstanding the attempt of student loan giveaways, the Republicans would have performed much better. But what this is an example of is another example of administrative overreach. So the president decides he wants to do something. As you guys correctly pointed out, he understood that Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi understood the president didn't have the constitutional authority to do it. But what they do is they say, okay, what's our goal? We want to achieve goal X. Now go look at the laws. Go back and see what you can scrub up, and that would justify what it is we're trying to do. That was true for rent forgiveness, even after the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional. Even after they said it was unconstitutional, Biden renewed the suspension of rent payments. DACA for children, the delayed action on illegal immigrants. Obama repeatedly said, I do not have the power to do it. I do not have the power to do it. I do not have the power to do it. Yet 2 years after he said it close to 53 times, he did it. Biden's suspension of the immigration laws. He doesn't have the power to do that, but he does it anyway. Now, as when we get to the student debt program, they have to scour the books. What justifies it? So they go to the HEROES Act in 2003, which Bush put in place because people that were in the military that were called to active duty that were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, they weren't able to repay their loans at that time. They were busy doing something else. They were killing terrorists. So specifically designed for the military, the Biden administration latches onto that, and now they're trying to use it to give it to students who just simply don't feel like paying back their obligations. So yeah, it was a vote-getting tactic, but it more speaks to an administrative state that we have to get away from. We have to get back to how laws are supposed to be passed. So there are two big issues that are in front of the Supreme Court now. One is the plaintiff's standing. What is standing? Not just anybody can bring a lawsuit. You're standing on the street corner and you see somebody's run over by a car. You don't have the right to bring a lawsuit on behalf of the person that was hit by the car because you weren't injured. But the person who was hit by the car has to sue. So we have 6 Republican states, dominated states, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, and South Carolina, and 2 individuals who are the plaintiffs in the case. So the Supreme Court has to determine, do these people have standing? Were they damaged? That's the first hurdle they have to get over. If they determine that they do have standing, that they were damaged, whether it's because of the tax structure of these various states or because it somehow impacts these 2 individuals, then, Jesse, I agree with you. I think that the Supreme Court will strike it down and find it unconstitutional. And the question they have to answer themselves is what they call the major questions doctrine. And that was a case that they determined in West Virginia versus the EPA, whether or not the Environmental Protection Agency was overreaching in some of the regulations that they were put in place. And the Supreme Court found and applied the major questions doctrine, which holds that in extraordinary cases of political and economic significance, where an agency makes unheralded use of its authority, the agency must be able to point to a clear statement from Congress authorizing the action. I don't know how you're going to get from the HEROES Act that they're relying on, which relates specifically to the military, and apply it to my neighbor's kid who is going to college and during their spring break goes down to Florida as opposed to Iraq, I think the Supreme Court will find that the administration has utterly failed to meet that hurdle and strike it down. So to me, the more important question to ask on this is, do these people have standing?
Jesse, I want to ask you this question on this loan forgiveness program, which is, even if it was constitutional, which it's not, what's the public policy involved here? Is this a good public policy to have loan forgiveness that way, as opposed to a bad public policy?
It is.
What do you say?
It's not. It's not, because these are. I mean, it's unfair. It's an unfair policy that we move forward, because these are individuals that made a choice on that. Where does it end? Where do other individuals get their loan forgiveness for their student loans or and whatnot from years past? That's the problem here, is the fairness and whatnot, and that it was not vetted through the process of committee hearings and through the oversight of the Congress and the Senate and the House of Representatives. That's, I believe, is the problem. And to speak to what Eric said, I mean, I'm just looking here. Justice Brett Kavanaugh said specifically during his examination of the Solicitor General that it seems very problematic, he says, for the administration to use an old law. And that, he also commented, quote, "Some of the biggest mistakes in the court's history was deferring to assertions of executive emergency power." We've seen that in a number of different cases, and it's come especially in COVID. I think COVID has shined a light on the manipulation and abuse of emergency executive authority.
This is why Democrats love crises. This is why they love a crisis, because then you need government to do something.
Mm-hmm. I mean, not to move away from this, we saw that during the Cuomo and how he was given executive authority, emergency executive powers, and basically he became a dictator. If this is not shut down, this leads this nation to go back to a dictatorship where one person rules all. And if you notice, a lot of presidents sometimes, and I have to give, you're right, Eric, you got to give Obama credit that he never took that extra step to overuse executive authority. I don't recall there being an emergency where he was granted
DACA. No, that isn't what I said. I accuse Obama absolutely did overuse the. I remember I have a pen and a phone. Right. That's what started all this. I have a pen and a phone.
Yep. All right, Kevin.
I have a pen and a phone.
And Kevin,
right. I apologize.
And Kevin has control of the.
Kevin is all powerful.
Kevin has control of the controls, and he's saying we have to take a break. This is the Long Island Report with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, distinguished lawyer, political commentator Eric Levine, and I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Stay tuned for more interesting conversation. We will be right back.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
All right, this is the Long Island Report. We are back. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with my two good friends and esteemed colleagues, Eric Levine, noted commentator and attorney, and Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. So, turning to another issue, let's talk about Obama's Iran deal. Let me just share a few thoughts with you, gentlemen, and I'll get your opinion. Obama's deal was a bad judgment all around. It never was to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. It laundered money to them, breaking federal law by changing the currency which was paid, and gave them billions of dollars. And then the question becomes, what did Iran do with those billions of dollars? Well, they became the most influential, dangerous sponsor of state-sponsored terrorism. All that money is moved not only into the Middle East to support terrorist groups, but all across the world. Right now, as we sit here, there's a war going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what the Iranians are doing is they're building drones to help the Russians slaughter the Ukrainian people. And they've now volunteered to build a munitions factory in Russia for drones and other munitions. And to make it even worse, you pick up the papers now and you find out that the Iranian government is now sending warships into our hemisphere, into Venezuela. Now, we almost went to a nuclear war with Cuba because of the encroachment by dangerous foreign powers off our shore, and we're getting into a situation where China buys land in Venezuela to set up military sites. Iran is sending their soldiers there to train the Venezuelans and to send warships. So, Eric, what do you think about that situation?
Well, it's an unmitigated disaster. I mean, let's take a step back and talk about how the JCPOA was put into place. John Kerry and Barack Obama talk about a lack of confidence in government. John Kerry and Barack Obama repeatedly lied to the American people to sell the JCPOA. They made the statement repeatedly that it blocked all paths to a nuclear weapon. That was a lie. It in fact guaranteed a legal path to a nuclear weapon. In 2030, under the JCPOA, all limitations on uranium enrichment were lifted. Once you do that, you're free to develop a nuclear weapon. John Kerry said not to worry, there are anytime, anywhere inspections. That was a lie. There were no inspections allowed of military sites. Guess where the nuclear program developed? On military sites inside Iran. So that was a lie. It lifted all restrictions on a ballistic missile system. There's only one reason that a country needs a ballistic missile system. That's to deliver a nuclear warhead. And yet, there were UN sanctions in place that prohibited Iran from developing a ballistic missile system, but as part of the agreement, the United States went to the UN and forced the UN and caused the UN to lift the restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile programs. The lie that our allies support the JCPOA. What do you call Israel? Israel may well be our single closest ally in the world. It always votes with us. It always supports us. And it's not just a conservative Israeli government. Liberals to conservatives in Israel, labor to Likud, secular to religious, all oppose the Iran nuclear deal inside Israel. So unless they're saying Israel's not an ally, to say that our allies supported the JCPOA was a lie. They presented it as, this will moderate, and Richard, this is to your point about the money, we'll give them this money and this will moderate their behavior. This will bring them into the community of nations and make them like a normal nation. Well, that was nonsense when they said it, but let's believe for a moment they were so ignorant that they actually believed it. But now we know what they do with the money. It wasn't to build schools and bridges. It was to build the ballistic missiles. It was to build a drone program. It was to build a nuclear weapon program. It was to fund their proxy terrorists in Yemen, in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Venezuela, all around in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria. That's what the money was used for. That $150 billion gift that Obama gave to Iran when we lifted sanctions and gave that money back went to build the drones. Congratulations to Richard, Jesse, myself, and every listener here. You helped pay for the drones that are killing Ukrainians. Congratulations, you helped pay for the drones that attack our troops in Syria. And we do absolutely nothing about it. So you could ask us, you may want to ask yourself, so why would we enter into such a crazy deal? Well, this goes back to Obama's view of the world. We all remember when Obama said there's no such thing as American exceptionalism. And then he went on his apology tour around the world, apologizing for American use of military power around the world. Well, as it related to Iran, the United States had a sin that it had to be giving forgiveness for. In 1958, there was a coup that overthrew Mossadegh and put the Shah in power. In Obama's warped view of the world, That was an American sin for which we had to atone. And how are we going to atone for that? We're going to shift the power base in the Middle East from Israel and our Sunni Arab allies, friends in the region, and we're going to shift it to Iran. We're going to give them a chance now. It's kind of like the internationalization of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're going to give Iran, we're going to allow Iran to have the bomb. We're going to allow Iran to have this money. We're going to allow Iran to be a hegemon of the Middle East. And we have to do this to atone for our sin that we committed, we underwrote a coup in 1958, which is ahistorical. We didn't do it. We may have supported the coup and said, rah, rah, we approve, we would prefer the Shah to a weak Marxist who was probably going to drift into the Soviet camp, but we didn't cause the coup. But in Obama's warped view of the world, we did, and we have to pay for it. And the JCPOA is his atonement.
Jesse.
All I say is amen to what Eric just said, because that's exactly, I don't think it could have been articulated any better. It comes down to boiling it down, as Eric said, $150 billion that we, the United States, released in sanctions to Iran is now being used as an effort in proxy wars against U.S. soldiers, against U.S. allies, and against the strongest ally we have and partner in the Middle East in Israel. And I am astonished that even now the Biden administration is trying to double down and trying to re-engage in this issue. What they basically, as Eric artfully articulated, that they have basically legalized Iran into having a ballistic missile system that can deliver a nuclear weapon. And at one point, when technology reaches a point where they can utilize it to anywhere in the world. And what we have done with a failed policy is shifted the balance of power in the Middle East and possibly in the hemisphere.
Eric.
I mean, a couple of things we should keep in mind. First of all, who's Biden's team, his Iran team? They're all Obama retreads. So people don't like to admit they made a mistake, so they double down on mistakes. So they'd rather say we were right or get their policy rather than admit, all right, we made a mistake, maybe we should change course. Reality and history have no use for it, so they would rather just double down. But fundamentally, we have to remember who Iran is. Iran was born at war with the United States in 1979. They've been at war with us since 1979 when they overthrew the Shah and took American hostages and held them for 444 days. And that is the legitimacy on which this government is based. It goes back to Khomeini. And it wasn't until Ronald Reagan became president and he made it clear once he became the president that if those hostages weren't released, there was going to be a military strike. Then all of a sudden these people were released. But Iran has been at war with the United States, and we unfortunately have not woken up to that fact, and we're not at war with them. We really need to strike back. And the best example is they're shooting drones at our troops in Syria. Maybe one or two cruise missiles from the middle of the Indian Ocean inside Iran to attract a drone factory. That'll stop.
Well, remember how they have their big event days, anniversaries of the revolution or other days they want to get support from the populace. They go out into the streets, and what do they yell? Death to the United States, death to Israel. And those are the people that John Kerry wants to resurrect again in a dangerous way, because he has not learned his lesson, because he's obsessed with so-called climate change. He doesn't understand 5,000 years from now we may have to deal with climate change. But right now we have to deal with existential threats to this country, and the fact that Iranian warships and nuclear capacity is being brought into our hemisphere against us is serious business, John Kerry. Wake up, grow up, face the truth. This is the Long Island Report. We're taking a break. We're with Jesse Garcia, the esteemed chair of the Republican Party, and Eric Levine, noted attorney and essayist and political commentator. We'll be back in a few moments for our final segment of this week's Long Island Report. Please stay tuned.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. and noted attorney, political commentator, and essayist Eric Levine. Eric, you want to make a final point on this Iran issue, and then I want to change the focus of the conversation.
Right. So I wanted to just pick up on the point you were making about Venezuela. Venezuela may well be the most underreported crisis that the United States is facing. What's going on in Venezuela? It's not just Iran is sending ships to Venezuela. Iran is there. Hezbollah, its terrorist proxy, is there. The Chinese are there. The Russians are there. Their militaries are there. The cartels are there. They're all working together. They're not working independently. This is not an accident. And the United States really needs to start focusing on what role China, Russia, and Iran are playing in Venezuela and the threat it poses to the United States. They're within a few hundred miles of the southern points of the United States. Cuba was 90 miles. And Cuba was a very, very weak government. And it was being supported by the Soviet Union, which really was no match for the United States at the time. The question we have is the United States prepared to deal with the threats that are in Venezuela right now? And we certainly can't deal with the threat that we're not acknowledging exists. So I think it's really important that the United States start turning its attention to Venezuela rather than Joe Biden inexplicably going to Maduro and asking him to pump more oil, which would underwrite his terrorist regime. Keep in mind, Maduro is an indicted narco-terrorist. If he were to ever come to the United States, there would be a warrant for his arrest, and he would be tried and most likely convicted for terrorism and drug smuggling. This is who Biden wants to deal with. And we also have to, now he has China, Russia, and Iran there. This is a threat we really need to wake up to.
Well, that's a good segue, Eric, because the next topic I want to discuss with you, gentlemen, is this. I call it the dangerous impacts of green energy obsession. We're now energy dependent rather than independent. Raging inflation. We're empowering our enemies. There's a threat to public health and safety. We have limitations on our ability to supply necessary energy that our people need. So, Jesse, what do you say about this energy obsession, this green energy obsession?
This obsession is ill-fated. It's not well thought out. It's not prepared. And it's funny, from a group of individuals, woke individuals and progressives that say we should follow the science. In this case, they don't follow the science. In many cases, just think of it. Everyone speaks about, all the, the electrification of cars and such. Yet, what gets the energy going? Your Honor and I, you and I have discussed this many times. There's more mining of raw materials in developing countries, in countries that are enemies of the United States that are required for this green energy obsession to be enacted and advanced. There's mining, there's fossil fuels that are being done. And all the while, you have a country like China that is not abiding and provides the biggest footprint of carbon footprint on the country, and yet they're not abiding by any of it. So no matter what we do, it's not going to happen. The problem here is that these individuals, these progressives, are just looking to change the United States and our way of life from that of being energy independent to energy dependent. And it's also trying to make it where the government runs everything. It runs energy. It runs thought process, no matter what. It's a problem that science has not caught up to. We jokingly say, well, during the torrential rainstorms in California, how are you going to start your electric car? There's no way of doing that. Even in some areas in the Northeast, if it gets below a certain temperature, you can't start your electric car. A friend of mine just recently, he's got an electric car. He couldn't start his car because of temperatures. This is where the progressives abandon science and go more for soundbite and political points than they do for policy, science, and purpose.
Eric.
Well, it's interesting. John Kerry himself, the czar of the climate world, admitted that if every signatory to the Paris Climate Accords did what they were supposed to do, if they met their obligations, it would have zero impact on the climate. But it's worse than that. The United States struggles mightily under the Biden administration to try to meet its obligations, weakening itself at home and abroad, while China, India, Russia, Iran, and the developing world have no use for it. So China in particular, we weaken ourselves and they empower themselves. But of course, this begs the question of why we are doing this. And Jesse, I think you put your finger on it. It's not to help the climate or the environment. And how do we know that? Because scientific fact, both nuclear energy and natural gas, through the miracle of fracking, have no carbon footprint. Now, there's no question. Let's admit, as a scientific fact, there is climate change. There's no question that's right. The issue is, to what degree does man contribute to it? That is an open question that is unresolved. But let's for the moment assume that man contributes 100% to it. Why wouldn't we want to use nuclear energy? Why wouldn't we want to use natural gas? Because those are solutions that were found by the private sector and entrepreneurs. If we use those solutions, then there's no use for government to stick their finger in the pie, to take control. It is all about, and Jesse, this is your point, this is all about a government takeover of the energy sector. We saw this with Obamacare. That was the beginning of the government takeover of the healthcare sector. It's all about a government control of the economy and government control over our lives. But energy is a huge portion of our freedoms, and it's really dangerous. We need to push back.
Jesse.
I agree. We need to push back. We need to have common sense approach to this issue. First and foremost, what did Eric begin this conversation with on this show? He said maybe we should open more pipelines than close them. That, for one, is going to provide us that bridge that we need to maybe get to a place where we're energy efficient, that the science catches up with the philosophy and the political rhetoric in the area of green energy and such, where we can do it and concurrently by getting better. We can be more successful as a nation by being energy independent and then exercising these plans methodically, following the science to get more renewable energies to, address climate change. We see our seas are rising. We see what was going on. We have to say that there is a contributing factor to that. But let's do that in a common sense approach to it, not just for the purposes of getting a soundbite.
Well, there have been recent studies which show the impact on everyday life. First of all, if you can't depend on energy, and they have to tell you in California that you can't depend on energy, why do you have these absolute mandates that you have to have so many electric cars and cut out all fossil fuel cars by a certain time? Why do you say that all new buildings have to be built with electric, and you are creating a housing crisis because you can't afford to have all that electric? How do you convert your buildings and your homes at a reasonable cost? Recent studies have shown very, very clearly that in New York State, higher energy bills are on their way to New York State consumers. And this is a real problem because with all these mandates that are coming from the left-wing legislature, supported by this governor, you're going to have higher costs to consumers. When you have higher costs to consumers, you have a limited supply, costs go up. You have to spend more money for an non-dependable source of energy, and it costs you more money. So what are you going to choose between sending your kid to a math tutor or filling up your car with electric chargers? And by the way, where are you going to get the electric chargers from? Because you need batteries. And to have batteries, you have to have natural resources. Where did 90% of the batteries come from right now? They're coming from China. What is that China to us? Our enemy, our adversary. They have a long-term plan for world domination to subvert our independence and make us a second-tier power. These energy mandates, this obsession with green energy, does not come without severe damage to the United States. Eric.
Look, the solution to this is entrepreneurship and American ingenuity. During both the George W. Bush years and the Trump years, America is one of the few, if not only, countries on the planet that both grew its GDP and reduced its carbon footprint. We have the ability to do it, and that's primarily because of fracking and natural gas. That's where we need to go for now, until such time as wind, solar, and some of these other alternative sources of energy are viable. They're not. So we need to stick with what we've got. I stick with American ingenuity.
Well, Kevin has stuck me with the get out sign, so I have to sign off for the Long Island Report this week. I want to thank Eric Levine once again being a wonderful co-host with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. We look forward to speaking with you next week. On behalf of Jesse and Eric, myself, we hope you enjoyed this week's Long Island Report. Thank you for listening.